Let's say you're walking home and a car pulls over, the driver rolls down his window and he yells out to you, "How do I get to Highway 24?" Your history professor has asked everybody in the class to give an oral report describing one battle from the war between the states, and you decide to review Gettysburg. Every Thanksgiving, you send your aunt a fruitcake made from your unique prize-winning recipe. This year, when she comes to your house, she said, "Would you please teach me how to make your fruitcake?" Well, in each one of these situations, your task is to give information to someone. And whether you're having just a spontaneous conversation or you're delivering a formal, prepared, rehearsed speech, you will often find that your speaking purpose is to inform or teach somebody something you know. So, a recent survey of both speech instructors and students who had taken public speaking asked them what they found was the single most important skill that they learned in their public speaking class, and they both ranked how to give an informative speech as number one. Well, conveying information to others is a pretty useful skill really in all walks of life. You may find that informing others is an important part of your job. Maybe, let's say, you become the regional manager of some national corporation and you have to report sales figures to the board of directors. Perhaps you become an accountant and you have to teach your secretary how to organize your files. Maybe you start teaching a cooking class at the local technical college, or you start chairing meetings of the monthly PTA at your kid's school. All of these situations require you to be able to effectively provide information. So what we're going to talk about today are some ways to build on your experience and enhance your skills in informing others. We're going to talk about the goals of informative speaking, look at some different types of informative speeches, and then finally talk about some general principles that will make your informative speeches more memorable. So let's start first with the goals of informative speaking. Speaking to inform others is a pretty challenging task. The information you convey to others is very rarely understood exactly the way that you mean it. So your job first will be to ensure that the audience understands what you're talking about. And so we do that by making sure that we are well organized, that we speak clearly, we provide the necessary support information to help the audience understand our information. Secondly, our job is to ensure that the audience retains as much of that information that we present. So having them remember what we say is the second goal that we want to achieve. So once again, we achieve that second goal by achieving the first goal of understanding, then retention. Now, let's take a look at the different types of informative speeches that we may do. Clearly, informative speeches can be classified by the subject areas that they cover. And so by classifying your speech, it can help you decide how to perhaps organize that information and how to present it. So as we take a look at the different types of informative speeches, there's several different areas that we can focus on. The first type of speech that you might do for an informative speech is a speech about an idea. So speeches about ideas, these are usually more abstract than any other type of speech. Speeches about ideas might include a speech about the freedom of speech, evolution, theories on aging, religion, communal living, the trickle-down theory of economics. All of these could be concepts and theories and hypotheses that might be an idea that could form the basis of a good informative speech. Now, most of these speeches are going to be organized topically by logical divisions. You may organize them by complexity as you talk about some easier to understand simple concepts first, and you get more complex and difficult as you go through the speech. Might be a couple of ways you organize speeches about ideas. Next, we have speeches about objects. Now, this is a speech about anything tangible. It's real. You can actually hold it up and show it to us as you do the speech. And, of course, that serves as a good opportunity for visual support as well as you show us that object that you are doing your speech about. Topics can include any number of a few million things. Maybe it's some collection of yours. Maybe it's sports cars, musical instruments. Maybe it's personal computers or, antique toys. There's so many things that could fall into this category here. And just as there are as many different ways or topics that could fall into this category, there's a lot of different ways you could organize a speech about an object as well. Typically, once again, speeches about objects can be organized topically, just looking at natural logical divisions. So let's say, for example, you're doing your speech about pipe organs, and you could break the speech down into the different parts of the pipe organ. Now, another way you might organize your speech about your pipe organ might be spatially, and spatial is by its physical layout. So you might do the speech in the order of top to bottom, front to back, north, south, east, west, left to right. And so you might start at the foot pedals, work your way up to the keyboard, and then you get to the pipes as you talk about the pipe organ. Now, another organizational pattern that might work might be chronological. And so as you organize your speech by time, then you might talk about the history and development of the pipe organ, when it was invented, changes it's gone through over the years, the future of pipe organs. Now, if your speech about your pipe organ turns into a speech on how to play the pipe organ, then that's going to move into the next type of informative speech, and that's a speech about a process or a procedure. So this would discuss how something works, describe a process that produces a particular outcome, and basically at the end of a speech about a process or a procedure, the audience should be able to describe, understand, perform, actually be able to do whatever it is that you're talking about in that process. So maybe it's a speech about how state laws are made, how the U.S. patent system works, how to refinish furniture, how to select an inexpensive stereo, or how to avoid long lines at registration. Clearly, you notice how each one of these topics starts with the word how. That how to is indicating that you're going to talk about how a process is completed. Next, we have speeches about people. This would be considered that biographical speech about somebody famous, for example. Now, when you do a speech about somebody, what it's important to try not to do is to tell us about every single aspect of that person's life. So in other words, you don't want to turn it into just a big laundry list of they did this, then they did that, then they did that, because that'll get a little monotonous and doesn't have any real focus. So the key to a good speech about somebody, a biographical speech, is to establish a theme. So in other words, you have a central idea, you have that one thing that you want us to learn about that person, maybe the fact that they were patriotic, that they were brave, that they were a crook, and then you build the speech around that theme and provide information from their lives and examples and facts that help support that particular theme that you want us to learn about that individual. Lastly, we have speeches about events. Clearly, major events, they punctuate our lives, they mark the passage of time. Think about where you were when certain things happened, big events. You can remember where you were. I always remember where I was when the first space shuttle exploded. I was in the cafeteria at Winthrop University and everybody was talking about it. The thing always used to be for my parents, do you remember where you were when Kennedy was shot? So whether it's the Twin Towers, when Princess Diana was killed, we can all think about those things and remember where we were. Now, clearly a major event can form the basis of a fascinating speech. However, sometimes you've got to be careful because clearly one of the goals of your speech is to teach us something new. And sometimes if you choose an event that's maybe too well known, you may find a difficult time providing us with new information. Let's go back to the attacks on the Twin Towers, 9/11. That's one of those things that has been analyzed down to the very second of what happened and what took place. Tons of documentaries have been put together, books have been written, articles have been written, and so as you start to think about, I want to do an informative speech about 9/11, what's that aspect of that topic that we don't already know? Because being an audience-centered speaker, we want to provide the audience with information that they're going to learn, that they're going to want to hear, and by telling us a bunch of stuff we already know is not very effective, and it's not going to captivate our attention. Now, when we start thinking about organizational patterns for speeches about events, clearly chronological order is the first thing that comes to mind as we do an order of time. But we also perhaps could do topical organization with an event as well. So let's go back to our history class when we're doing our speech about a battle from the Civil War. Clearly, you can follow a chronological order as you talk about the order of battle that happened on first day, second day, and so on. But you might also decide to focus on three major causes of the war and focus on political, economic, and social issues as well. So there's different ways you could approach an event. Now, the last thing I want to talk about are a series of things that we can do to make our informative speeches a little bit more interesting and memorable. Think about the best teacher you ever had. They probably were a pretty good lecturer, and they had some special talent for making even the most mundane information interesting to listen to. And like teachers, some speakers are better than others at presenting their information in an interesting and a memorable way. Here are some of the things that we can do with our speeches. First, present information that relates to your listeners. So that means that as an audience-centered speaker, we've got to learn to adapt our message to the people who will hear it. So we think about their interest, their needs, their expectations, their levels of knowledge they already have about the topic, and then we apply that to the development of our speech. There's something we can play here that helps us relate to the listeners, and that term is called proximity. And proximity is where we bring it close to home for the audience. If I can relate to it better, then I'm going to be more interested in listening to it. So what would that mean? Let's say you're doing your speech about, let's say maybe wearing seat belts, and you've got access to all kinds of seat belt use data and statistics. Well, you've got access to a national study, one really good one done by the California Highway Patrol, but then you've also got study information from the county that you live in. Well, you know, your local audience is going to have closer proximity to that local information because they're a part of that data, more so than a study done in California or one that's done on a national level. So utilize proximity to help relate to your listeners. Next thing we do is we establish a motive for the audience to listen. Unfortunately, most audiences are not sitting there waiting breathlessly to hear whatever you've got to say. You've got to give us a reason to listen. You've got to motivate us. And, you know, sometimes like with a class lecture, that motivation's built in. If you don't listen, you're going to fail the test and not do well with your speech. But we all don't have that. So maybe one way we establish listening motivation is we ask a question. We pose that question, and so therefore as an audience member we want to hear the answer, so therefore we focus and we listen more, anticipating learning the answer to that question. But the bottom line is you've got to have your audience saying, this concerns me, this is important to me. In other words, you got to show me why I need to invest the next 5, 10, 15 minutes of my life listening to you do your speech. Next, build in repetition. There's a little phrase that I use from time to time in terms of organizing a speech. It's tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. We build in repetition to help the audience with the listening process. Therefore, by repeating things a number of times, first of all, they hear it and understand it, but then it helps move your information from their short-term memory into long-term memory. So we have a good preview in the introduction where we tell them what we're going to tell them. We state our information, tell them what we're going to tell them in the body of the speech, and then we have a good summary or a review in the conclusion where we tell them what we told them. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. Next, use simple ideas rather than complex ones. Your job as a public speaker is to get your idea across to the audience, not stand up there and show them how smart you are by seeing how much information you can cram in to the time that you have. So the more simple your ideas and phrases are, the greater the chance your audience will remember them. Reinforce key ideas verbally. So in regards to certain things you say can draw special attention to the point that you want to make. Simply stating something like, this is the most important point that I want to make today, will draw that special attention to it. this is the most compelling thing that I want to mention in my speech. So there's no problem verbally saying something that draws special attention to a key point. We can also reinforce key ideas non-verbally as well. For example, a movement, a gesture, a facial expression might serve the purpose of accenting or emphasizing some key phrase. Maybe it's a well-placed pause by not saying anything at all. You build that anticipation and suspense as you get ready to go into the next thing. It's a pointing finger, a slicing motion, maybe a pounding of a fist on the lectern, all can provide that information to emphasize that point. We want to make sure that we pace our information flow. Hopefully we are providing new information to the audience that they don't already know, but we've got to give them time to absorb, think about, and process all of that new information. Use analogy to relate new information to old to help the audience understand the point we're trying to make better. So if you're talking about a new idea or a new concept that we don't know or we're not familiar with or we don't understand, then you say, well, it's just like this, which is something that you are familiar with and you do understand. And we use that analogy and comparison to help us understand the new concept better. Finally, create memorable visual aids. Today's audiences, we've grown to depend upon more than just words alone. So by connecting your words with visual stimulus, it's going to help us remember those ideas a little bit better. Television, computers, cell phones, social media, all of these are image driven. So when you present the summary of some statistical data, that's when you also show us a nice colorful graph or a pie chart that represents that data. They reinforce the words and the numbers that you cite.